Well, I'm completely at some theological linguistic. Well, Dr. Adger looks more energetic than the first day.
It's the miracle of espresso.
Okay, he's going to give us his 7th lecture until 3:05.
Yeah.
Let's give him a big hand to cheer him up.
Thank you very much. Okay, so if you remember where we stopped yesterday, I gave you a bunch of evidence for the CP peripherality generalization, which basically looks as follows. It says, and we just looked at n initial cases, right? So it looks like you get n AP PP, okay, and not n PP AP. We haven't looked at the head final cases, which are more relevant to a language like Korean, I would guess, where you have PP, AP, N, and probably not AP, PP. Okay? So that was the peripherality generalization, the PP peripherality generalization. And so I showed you for N initial languages, I went through Hawaiian, which is the Polynesian language. I went through Hebrew, which is a Semitic language. I went through Spanish, which is a Romance language, and did I do any other ones? Oh yeah, and then Gaelic, which is a Celtic language. So a bunch of different N initial kinds of languages, and they all seem to fill this. And I've given this talk in lots and lots of different places all over the world, and I still haven't got a counterexample to N, AP, PP being the base order. So I think that's looking pretty good so far. Okay? Question is how this is derived. So, and I showed you that the standard analysis, so let's take the Gaelic example that you see in 43 in your handout. So that says, Nakoik Jalavan Mora Javadi, which is the 5 picture big of Mary. Right? Noun, adjective, prepositional phrase. The standard view of this is the one that you see in 44 in the handout. So that basically says that you start off with NPP, and then you add on the adjective, and then you raise the noun to some position, and then you and so like in the analysis I've given you here, it's a quantifier-y kind of position. Right, this is the head of that, and then you put in the quantifier 5, and then you put in the determiner. Okay, so that's the kind of analysis that almost everyone who's ever worked in Celtic gives to this. Okay. Now, it turns out that this analysis is wrong, and you can show it quite clearly it's wrong from the behavior of demonstratives and quantifiers in the language. Okay. So have a look at example 45. This is how you do a demonstrative in Gaelic. What you say is, you say, the example that I have there, pictures, nice, those. Okay? So you've got a discontinuous way of doing the demonstrative. You say the, then the noun phrase, then those. Okay? And it's crucial when you have a demonstrative here that you have the definite article here. Right? So there's a requirement for some definiteness of this preceding element. Okay? So for example, in 46a, the way that you say nice pictures in Gaelic is just the same way as you say it in English, except backwards. You just say pictures nice. So, Jalavan Snock, Gaelic doesn't have any indefinite articles, actually neither singulars nor plurals. You just get 0 form, right? So, picture is nice, and you can't say pictures nice those. You have to say the pictures nice those, okay? So, this is a kind of selectional kind of requirement going on here. Okay, so, there's very good evidence that this unit here is a constituent, okay? And the good evidence is that we can replace it with a pronoun, for example. So that's what you see in 47. Okay, I've given you a different demonstrative there, shin rather than ut, so there's different demonstratives. So you can say it shin, which is they, those. Okay, so you can replace this unit, this string, the picture is nice here, you can replace it with a pronoun. As we all know from Linguistics 101, that's good evidence that the picture is nice as a constituent. We can also coordinate the pictures nice, okay? And that's what you see in 49a. You get the pictures and the images, those. Okay, so you got the Jalaban, the pictures, and the images, those. I'm writing those even though in Gaelic there's no plural marking on the demonstrative. It's just a single form thing. Okay, so that again, or you can say the picture is nice, and the image is horrible. Those, which suggests that this is constituent, that's constituent. We're coordinating them, which of course means that this would be a constituent. Okay, again, very nice, straightforward, lovely, old-style linguistics that tells us that this is the constituency of the pictures nice those. Okay, now here comes the and we can replicate that same set of effects with the quantifier ule, which comes after this. You say the picture's nice, those all. Okay. So I haven't gone through that in the handout, but you can then show that the picture's nice, those is a constituent, and so on. Okay, so the constituency of the picture's nice, those all is the one that you see in 52, okay? Where you've got the, and then picture's nice, right? And then that's constituent, and then we've got those, and then that's constituent, and then we've got all. Right, so everyone should be pretty happy with that. Now here comes the magic. What happens if we take a relational noun, like pictures, and we give it its argument? So the prediction under the standard view, okay, will be that you get this. You get pictures. Oh, let's just do it. Let's just do it here. So we've got, this is pictures. This is nice. This is of Mary. And what we would do is raise pictures here, get pictures nice of Mary. Now, if this is the right constituency for the pictures nice those, to add those onto it, we have to put those here, right? It's the only way to get that order right. But now what we predict is the pictures nice of Mary, those. Yeah? That follows from where we got to. Is that good? No. That's completely ungrammatical in the language. You don't say the pictures nice, those of Mary. You say the pictures nice, those. Sorry, you don't say the pictures nice of Mary, those. You say the pictures nice, those of Mary. So actually, the prepositional phrase doesn't occur where you might expect it to occur. It seems to occur way over here. Okay? So that just shows us, I think, that there is no way to maintain the traditional view of the surface position of the PP. Okay? The PP cannot be local to its N, to the exclusion of the A. Right? The PP has to be far away from that in order to get this data to work out. Everyone with me? Yeah. It's like a very straightforward kind of like syntactic argument. Now, the fact that prepositional phrases occur on the outside of final demonstratives in languages has been noticed before for Romance. So there's a paper by Adger, way back in 2002, and she gives the examples from Spanish in 55. So, el cuadre ese de Juan de Picasso. The picture this of Juan of Picasso, meaning Picasso's picture of Juan. Okay? So you can see that what we've got there is that the of phrase is again outside of the right word demonstrative. And her conclusion from that is that the demonstrative is low. So she thinks that what's going on there is that the demonstrative is somewhere like here. So when you raise the noun past it, you get picture nice those, or picture nice that of what. So her argument is the demonstrative must be very low, but we can see that for Gaelic at least that can't be the case, or we wouldn't be able to capture the constituency of demonstratives. And actually it turns out it's also true for Spanish, right? So if you look at 56, in Spanish you can see that you can coordinate the picture, right, to the exclusion of the prepositional phrase. So and to the exclusion of the demonstrative, in fact, more pertinently, actually. Okay? So you can say the picture and the, what do I have here? Photo, those, of what? There's no way to get that out of a low demonstrative because this is not a constituent. Yeah? So if we assume Bourget's viewpoint, we wouldn't be able to get the picture nice, those. We wouldn't be able to get the picture nice as a constituent because it's not in her story. Right? So it's even more strict, it's even better in Spanish than it was in Gallic actually, because you can see that the demonstrative in in Spanish is plural, which tells you that actually it has to take scope over the coordinate structure where we've got two singulars. Right? So you say in 56, el cuadro y el foto estés de Juan, which means that you've got a singular picture, a singular photo, we've got to get them together in order to get the plural that estés, the plural agreement that estés shows. Okay? So basically, Bourget is wrong and the standard view of PP surface position is wrong. Doesn't mean to say that so all this is an argument against is the surface position of the PP is here. Obviously, if you could say that the deep position of the PP is here and some funky stuff has happened to get it out here, and then we create the right constituency. Right? So the only way to save the standard view is not what people have said before, which is head move n to up high to q. You might have to do that anyway, but you have to do something else to the PP to keep the standard view. Right? And moreover, you have to do it obligatorily, and to the extent that this is true across languages, you have to do it obligatorily in all languages. Which strikes me as weird, right? An obligatory movement from a deep position to a surface position in all languages. But movement is the kind of thing that we expect to be parameterizable, right? So that seems very strange. Okay, so did you have a question? Sorry.
A simple data question. About the distribution of the determiner and demonstrative, should they occur together? Is there a co-occurrence restriction? Or?
So the co-occurrence restriction goes, whenever you have the demonstrative, this whole thing needs to be definite. Right? So you can make it definite by either putting a pronoun in, which is definite, or by putting a proper name in, which is definite, or by putting a definite noun phrase in, which is definite. And definite noun phrases have a definite article in them. There are a bunch of other determiners which count as D-ish enough. So, for example, the determiner gach, which means each, we'll do this as well. The determiner immer, which means many, but it's only a strong distributional version of many. We'll do that as well. So basically, strong quantificational elements and definite determiners are the things that can occur with the demonstrative.
And the demonstrative is optional, right? When we have definite article, should we have always the demonstrative? Optional?
No. A definite article without demonstrative just means definite DP. Definite article with demonstrative means located definite DP, right? This, that. There's three levels, so we've got this, that, and that.
Okay. Is there any possibility of analyzing this one as partitive, or in English, those of the pictures?
I see. There is an alternative partitive construction where you have to say the ones, those of the pictures. Na fjagen shin jan jalavan, you could say. So the question was, could this be a partitive?
Just as Professor was somewhat uneasy about it, because somewhat, the definite articles demonstrate mean very syntax. This is the complementary distinction.
Yeah. So the point being that in English, dem, demonstrative, and d are complementary distribution. In actually many languages they're not. So it's not just Gallic. So French, for example, right? So in French, you say something like ce café ci, this coffee this, right? Or ce café là, this coffee over there. Now, I mean, French doesn't use le café ci, right? It uses ce café ci, so it's got a special kind of definite article it uses with demonstratives, right? But there's a sort of two parts to it. Like here, there's two parts to it. And in that's actually pretty common across languages. I mean, it's true that there's a deep connection between these two, right? And in fact, you might think in English, this is really this here, right? And that what's happened is the D, so if you do this in English, we would say that we've got them taking D. I'll do it in old style, right? Rather than my new style. And then you might say that actually this is right? And this is this marks number. So you get O's, E's, is, at, right? And then this raises into here, you get those, these, this, that. So even in English, you might say that actually there's good evidence for the two separate parts of it.
I have a question. So in the demonstrative case, where is the position for another PP argument or?
So PPs, all the PPs occur out here.
Okay.
Yeah, so a locative, for example, would occur there, but also an argumental one like picture.
So every PP
It's going to be outside.
higher.
Yeah. It's higher up. Yeah. Okay, so so what I've just done there is I've said that it's very crucial to understand this. I've said that the surface position of the PP is not where people normally put the surface position of the PP. It's not in the complement of n position. Okay, it has to be somewhere else. The question then is how to get it somewhere else. So this is now a question of derivation, right, as opposed to a question of surface analysis. Surface analysis, we've established quite categorically that the PP has to be outside of this other constituent by using our miraculous techniques of constituency tests. Right? I love it when you can do syntax that's just constituency tests. So kind of believable. All right, so there are a number of ways, people have noticed this before in Celtic actually, and there are a number of ways that people have attempted to deal with it. So David Willis in a 2006 Lingua paper on Welsh suggested that there was obligatory exposition of PPs in Welsh, right? I mean, what does that mean, obligatory exposition, right? An obligatory exposition of PPs. So there is actually exposition of relative clauses, which behaves like exposition, and it's optional, right? Whatever it is, we do have exposition in these languages. So I've given you some examples of relative clause exposition, for example, in 58 A and B, right? Anjala Javadi Adainu, the picture of Mary that you did, and Anjala Adainu Javadi, the picture that you did of Mary. So we can see that there's some commutativity between relative clauses and PPs. But the bigger problem with that analysis is it's not an analysis. It just says there's obligatory movement of the PP to the right, and it certainly doesn't explain why this is universally true, right? Which it is. So I haven't gone through all the different languages to show you, but actually those languages which have rightward elements that you can show the previous bits of constituent have the PP after that rightward element. So there's a deeper kind of issue there, which is, exposition is something you expect to be optional, and you'd be saying that it's not optional in this language, which is weird. On top of that, this seems to be a universal, right? And it turns out that, if it's universal, then it would be universal exposition of PPs. And you kind of go well, what's the evidence that PP was ever in its base position in that case? So I think that a way of handling this by universal exposition is not ideal. It also doesn't give us any motivation for why that PP might move to the right. Okay, it just sort of stipulates it. So theoretically, that proposal is just not a no-go. A more interesting proposal, which does give us a motivation for the movement here, is Keynes' proposal. So Keynes suggested in 2004, it's been taken up by Cinque in his work, that actually he also thinks that these PPs are outside of the noun phrase. that Kane also thinks are outside of verb phrases, for verb phrases. And the derivation that Kane gives is as follows. So it adopts the view that we have a noun having a complement, and the noun is relational. It has a complement that you assign a theta rule to. So that complement would be a DP. So you notice how this is just like remarks on normalization that we talked about yesterday. Then the idea is that you build a noun phrase out of that. Then what you want to do is maybe you put an adjective in there, and then you maybe raise the noun up. And then what you want to do after that is you want to assign case to this DP. Right? So what K suggests is you put in a K, it tracks the DP into the specifier, KP there, and then K is not okay on its own. K needs to be licensed by something else, and the thing it gets licensed by is a preposition. And K then raises into the preposition here. And then what happens is, into the specifier of that preposition, you raise the remnant here. Use different color. You guys are kind of familiar with this kind of analysis, I guess, right? You raise this remnant here, which now just consists of NA, right? You raise that remnant and you put it in the specifier of the PP. So now what we get in terms of pronunciation is NAP PP. Right? And in terms of constituency, that means we've got N and A together, right, to the exclusion of the PP bit. Right? So the final constituency of this will look like we've got NA as a unit, and then here we've got P, and here we've got PP. So you see that we get the NA as constituent with the PP outside of it. The P and the DP don't form a constituent in Kane's system, right? But this whole thing forms a constituent, and this is empty. So you could further extract that, and you'd be carrying along this. That's similar to the issues, or similar to the analysis that Collins gives of passives that we saw the other day. Okay. All right. So that's Kane's analysis. I'm going to come back to that analysis because I think that theoretically that is a much more interesting analysis than the exposition one. Why? Because it gives us a motivation for the movement of the complement of n away from that n. The motivation is a case motivation. Right? You move to get case here. And then there's also motivation for why you have the p, which is that k needs to incorporate into something else to assign case. Right? So, this is just a better motivated analysis from a theoretical perspective than the Willis analysis. And it gives you the right outward constituency. There's another analysis which belongs to Sadler, and that's an analysis which is very, very surfacey. And what Sadler proposes is that we just have a right branching structure all the way. Right? So you have N, A, P, P. Right? It's the right branching structure. Now, there's a lot of good arguments against Sadler. The biggest argument against Sadler is really that, so this would be something like Jalav, let me say in English, picture, big, of Mary. The biggest problem with that proposal, which gets the right layering of constituency, is that its right branchingness makes the wrong predictions for binding. So it turns out that you can say picture big Johns of Mary, right? In Sadler's analysis, Johns goes in there. This is a uniformly right branching structure. So you get picture big Johns of Mary, which of course predicts that you shouldn't be able to bind from the possessor into the PP, right? Because the possessor is not C commanding the PP. And in fact, you might expect to predict either no binding is possible the other way at all, or if this is a possible binder, that you can bind backwards. But actually that's false. You can always bind from the possessor into the PP. So that's the data that you see in 67. So you can say Jalavan, so that's pictures. You can put an adjective you like, hey, more, and then Nankalakan of the girls, Jechele of each other. And that's a perfectly fine sentence, 9 phrase in Gaelic, the girls' pictures of each other. But of course, in a uniformly right branching structure, it doesn't make any sense. Right? And I'll show you in a little bit of time later on. Actually, I can show you, yeah. Is there a good example? Yeah, actually just flick very quickly to 77. And we'll come back in a second. It's what 77 shows, this is just a normal sentence, right? What 77 shows, it goes, bought a friend of every boy a picture of his mother. A friend of every boy is a constituent, right? So every boy is inside that constituent, right? And therefore can't bind into his mother to the right. Even if a friend of every boy were to C-command a picture of his mother in this sentence, this shows you that you need C-command from the quantifier itself, every boy, into his mother, right? So this is just to independently tell you that these languages have a C-command requirement on reciprocals, or on binding in general. So Sandler's analysis can't capture the binding facts. Right? And there are a bunch of other facts it can't capture either. It can't capture the semantics of scope-sensitive adjectives, and it has problems with selection, and there's a whole pile of problems with it. But I think that the knockdown argument really is the fact that it can't capture the basic binding facts. Okay, so we're really left with K so far. Right, Seidler's not going to work, and Willis is not going to work. You've got Kane, or we've got me. That's the other possibility. Yeah.
Comment about Willis's obligatory extrapolation.
Sure.
The peripherality of PP, which is stated as generalization, is reminiscent of the peripherality of fact clauses, clause, right? So, for a mysterious reason, I mean, that clauses must be peripheral, like at the beginning of the clause or at the end of the clause.
That's not quite true, right? Because, I mean, I can say, I believe that John is an idiot wholeheartedly. Or I believe wholeheartedly that John is an idiot, right? So it's not true that, and wholeheartedly modifies believe, right? So in I believe wholeheartedly, I believe that John is an idiot wholeheartedly, which is perfectly fine. That shows you that the CP is not required to extrapose to the right of the VP in a head initial language. It can, but it's not required to. So I don't think that you could say that we see other cases of obligatory extraposition. I don't know of any other case of obligatory exposition. Yeah.
Probably the comparative clause, depending on the relation between the...
Yeah, comparative clauses are interesting though, because I mean, I would give the analysis to comparative clauses that I'm going to get to this kind of thing, which is that they're base generated far to the right. So there are some things which you never see in their putative base position. And that, for me, is good evidence that they've never been in that putative base position, and the semantics should be organized via functional structure, which is higher up. So I haven't really thought about comparative clauses, but to the extent that they are always external to the main clause, it could be because of that. Okay, let's say I'll just remind you of the execution that I proposed yesterday for prepositional phrase complements of relational nouns, and the execution I proposed looked as follows. It said that we had a noun phrase constituent which would have adjectives in it, and other things perhaps. And that constituent was in the outer specifier of one of my little cove heads, right, with a KP inside here, and then the cove head had its whatever it was, right, part. Or the one I'll be looking at just now, because it's the one that allows you to have two PPs, is I'll call rep. And what rep stands for is representation. Right? So this would be something like, we'll still have not head movement, but we'll be pronouncing the N higher up in the adjective. So we'll just write that as though it's head movement. So we'll have picture, big, and then here this will be the preposition, right? Of or Jen in Gaelic, okay? Mary. So again, we get the right constituency. Okay, so the constituents we get here is that the N and the A are a constituent to the exclusion of the PP. And we saw yesterday I motivated this analysis on the basis of not so much the syntax of this, but on the basis of the way that the semantics of relational nouns was going to work. Okay? So we've got two kinds of things that give you the same constituent structure, essentially. Right? We get this one by the standard view that the N takes a complement, movement of that complement, then movement of the remnant. Right? Or we say my view, which is the N never takes a complement. Picture is just picture, it's not relational. Right? And there is a semantically contentful piece of functional structure, effectively, this cof, which relates the two elements. So the relationality is in the syntax in this case. Here the relationality is basically the argument structure of this noun being satisfied locally.
Yeah, so let me make sure one thing. I'm wondering whether your relational category part, does this participate in pronunciation at PF interface? Does it make any sound?
It's an extremely excellent question. So I've been calling these things like light nouns, right?
Yes.
And one might expect to find some languages that pronounce these light nouns. But all the languages that I've talked about so far only have a reflection of the semantics of the noun in the preposition, right?
Right.
So there's a bigger theoretical question here, which is what is syntactic structure in general? And the view that I'm going to be drifting towards, and actually it turns out to be very much like a Keynian view, is that syntactic structure is the modification, the overt modification of null semantically contentful elements. Right? And they're always null, effectively. So actually the analysis I'm going to give you at the end for cat, just cat, is that cat also has a cof. Right? But it's a thing. And unlike part, which is relational, right, or this cof is relational, this is like a transitive version of cof.
Yes.
Right? So transitive of V. This will be like unaccusative of V, in a sense. It'll only be one argument. So basically we'll just have this structure. Oops. And then we'll have in here, we'll have cat. And then we have D above there, right? So the cat, the overt word cat, is a modifier of a null piece of structure, thing, which is never pronounced. So that's where I'm kind of going theoretically. And that's why the answer to this question is an answer that really requires me to say what I want to do broadly, right? What I want to do is say the overt syntactic structure is this is like LF. This is like pure semantic LF stuff, right?
Okay.
So that's the answer effectively. We don't expect to hear this pronounced in the same way as we don't pronounce this. It's a bit crazy perhaps to say that overt syntactic structure is just always a modifier of silent elements like this.
So
but I think let me just finish. But I think what it does for you is it allows you to understand the limitations that you see in what we have as our syntactic structure. So for example, here, we know that nouns can be, can be concrete things like thing, they can be abstract things like idea, they can be, and so I think this is what's going on also with mass count. Kind of something here is that stuff, right? So actually, but we don't have something like, dangerous, right? So that is, human syntax only has a limited set of basic units that it builds things out of, and that's what these are. So that's my sort of, in the end, that's going to be where I want to go. So the reason that we don't pronounce this is because we never pronounce these things.
So that means you don't make distinction between LF and PF.
No, that's right.
You structure mix.
Yeah, I don't really buy that there's any derivation of LF.
So all of is representational.
Yeah.
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 On the other hand, in the case of the passive, you have the past root, and you have the pronunciation of words.
Good point.
And on the other hand,
Right,
very
another
true.
question
Right.
is the other point is that it is by using this structure, you say that PP is peripheral. That you might expect that even in passive, biphrase
Right.
should be in the peripheral. But
It is, though,
It
right?
is?
Yeah, the biphrase is peripheral to the rest of the.
But
And we can see that, for example, with particle verbs, right? So the number was looked up by John. The number was looked by John up. Star.
Like
So that suggests that look up is where the actual VP is. We can't see the object because we've moved it, right? But the look up is where the VP is.
How about, like,
the PP is always peripheral.
Manadva,
What about what?
Manadva, the dictionary was looked up.
So the question is about adverbs. So the number was looked up quickly,
Yeah, something.
yeah, by John, or the number was looked up by John quickly. So that's a question about where the base generation of the adverbs go, right? So all we're saying is that the biphrase is peripheral to the VP, right? The quickly is presumably outside the VP at some point, right?
But is
The reason I chose the example with the particle is because the particle is not higher than the VP, it's down inside the VP in some kind of resultative phrase.
But is it true that you might expect the biphrase always in the peripheral if you
It will be peripheral to the constituent containing the V and anything inside that constituent, right? Right. So it will always be peripheral to that. But adverbs, for example, maybe they modify little VP, or maybe they modify like a spectral structure,
higher.
and they're higher up in that case. So you don't expect it's like in these PP peripherality cases here. Actually, we don't find, as we just saw in the example, one of the examples we just saw, we can find relative clauses on the outside of these or on the inside of them, right?
Yeah.
So all I'm saying is that they're peripheral to the piece of structure that is in their spec. And actually, though that prediction is made by this system and by this system, so that prediction doesn't change. I mean, it's not something that allows you to distinguish between the two systems. Okay? But I completely, I absolutely accept that the question of the pronunciation of these things is open. Yes. What I want to do is I want to find a language at one point where you can pronounce them. So yeah, I accept that that's a mystery under this system. Okay. All right. So these are the two views that we have, right? The Kanian view and my view. Now, can we distinguish between them? We can, I think, but it's going to take some work. Okay. Now this is going to be the hardest bit of anything we've done so far, because it involves binding, and it's going to involve binding and order, and it's going to involve binding and order within prepositional phrases. Okay, so even I, when I think my way through this, find it hard. Okay, so maybe you guys won't, but I do. All right, so what I'm going to do is establish a few facts about how binding works in Celtic, and then I'm going to show you that when we have more than one PP in these kinds of situations, that there's a certain kind of hierarchical relationship between the two PPs. Okay? In my view, there will be essentially one coph embedded in the specifier of another coph. That will give us two PPs. Okay? And in this view, we would say that there's essentially two case marking elements creating two PPs. Okay? And then I'm going to show you that in this view, in the Kanian view, there's no way of getting the binding data without stipulating it. Right? So the Kanian view can capture the binding data, but what it has to do is it has to stipulate what the binding data is. Whereas in this view, there's no stipulation needed. Right? The stipulation in the Kanian story will have to be a set of stipulations about reconstruction, which are not made in this view. So it's a subtle argument, but I think it's a fairly strong argument that says this view gives us a much better understanding of how the binding systems work than this view does. This view really doesn't give us any understanding of it. It's able to capture it, but doesn't allow us to understand it, whereas this view does allow us to understand it, and therefore this view is better. Just as well as you'll remember, because my theory rules out roll-up. Right? So my theory can't have this derivation in it. So this then is actually, in the end, once I've convinced you of this, going to be an argument for the usefulness of a theory that rules out roll-up, because of course, if a kid has roll-up, why shouldn't the kid come up with this kind of analysis for these prepositional phrases? But I'll show you that they don't. They come up with this kind of analysis. Okay? Does everyone see the structure of the argument? Yeah? Alright, so first of all we start off by showing you that in Gallic, oh, I've got tons of time, that's great. In Gallic, we have a normal C-command conditional binding. So in 75, we say Chenig gach gile jalav javahid. So bought every boy a picture of his mother. Okay? Gallic is a VSO language. So it's standardly treated by taking the verb to look like normal verbs, and the verb phrase to look like normal verb phrases, and the verb to raise into some higher position. Okay? I'm not really going to take a viewpoint on that. It's certainly true that there's extremely good evidence that the subject C commands the object in Gallic, however that's going to work. Either there's some position here, or if you like head, you put head in, doesn't really matter. And that the verb ends up here. Okay? So that's like all the work by McCloskey, by me, by Ramchan, by Rousseau, by Roberts, by Liz. Right? So subject C commands the object. They're the constituent to the exclusion of V, and what you see is what you expect. So you get bought, every boy, picture of his mother. And you get the bound reading for that, right? So that's each boy bought a picture of that boy's mother. Okay? If we put the object in this position, or not the object, if we put his mother in this position, and we put the quantifier in this position, we can't get binding. So that's what you see in 76. Chenig Kavahil, Jaljaka Gila. So bought his mother, a picture of every boy. Impossible for the bound reading. As my informant said, well, there's only one mother. Right? So, and then we can see that it's actually a C-command relationship as well, rather than an argument structure kind of relationship, because in 77, as I showed you earlier on, if this is here is friend, every boy, and here we've got his, that's bad. You can't get the binding there. And that's because, of course, this doesn't C-command this. Okay? So it's very straightforward. It looks just like you'd expect, just like English. So I've shown you that in 75 to 77 inside the CP, right, inside the finite clause, we see exactly the same effects inside a noun phrase. So that's the first thing to establish. So Gallic has a couple of different ways of doing possessor constructions. And the one that I'll use for this is a genitive type construction. And we'll come back to the analysis of this genitive type construction later on. But basically what you have is picture, and then every boy in the genitive, and then the rest of his mother. It's clear that you have to say that this C commands into here, because that's is a perfectly fine sentence, or sentence, right? So what's the analysis of that? Well, we'll come to it in detail, but it has to be something like the analysis of the clause, in a sense, right? However that looks. Right? This is going to C command into here. Okay? I'll just tell you what it looks like, actually. So we're going to end up saying that up here there's a D position, and the possessor ends up inside this D position, so this is where every boy will be. And then what happens is this noun phrase moves up into the spec KP, and we get picture, every boy, of his mother. That's going to be my analysis. You can do a very similar analysis from the Canadian story, it doesn't matter. Okay? The crucial point is that we can see that you can bind the possessor into the PP. Okay? Alright, so, and if you do it the other way around, you can't get it, so that tells you that the PP doesn't C command the possessor, that's in 79. And we see the same C command effect in terms of if you make the possessor complex, the quantifier can't bind out. So you know, this looks like what you might expect it to look like. Okay? Alright, it turns out in Gallic, this is not going to be absolutely crucial to the argument, but it's worth pointing out. Turns out in Gallic, much like in English, I think, a quantifier that binds a pronoun must C-command that pronoun overtly, that is not under reconstruction, right? So basically you need to C-command the pronoun in overt structure, and you can see that from 81, 82, and 83. So, was his mother kissed by every boy, right? And that's bad. So we assume by every boy, potentially C commands the object position in deep structure, not deep structure, but in the base. And then every boy raises out into the subject position, but that's not going to work. Sorry, his mother raises out into the subject position, right? But you can't get binding, okay? So that looks a little bit like English. His mother was kissed by every boy is also bad in English. How many pictures of him did every boy put in the post is bad, right? Weak crossover violation, effectively. Okay, so we can't actually have every boy see. So we assume that 82. How many pictures of him did every boy put in the post would be derived by taking how many pictures from low down. Right? If you could bind under reconstruction, this should be good, but you can't. And then 83 shows the same thing for clefts. So broadly it looks like, much like in English in effect, in Gaelic quantifier binding of a pronoun must be an overt structure. So that's 84, it's not really a generalization that's very deep, it's just a fact about Gaelic clause structure. Okay, so with that under our belt, we now have a look at what happens when we have multiple prepositional phrases inside the noun phrase. And when I discovered this phenomenon, I was like, I had no idea how to analyze it. I was just, this is like completely bizarre. What the hell is going on here? And I discovered it years ago in up in the Isle of Barra in the Outer Hebrides, sitting with one of my informants, and she was like this, and I was like, are you sure? And then I checked it with her mother, and I checked it with someone else's grandmother, and it was exactly the same. It's different from, then it turns out it's exactly the same in English, actually, right? So I had never noticed it in English, but I noticed it by working with these old grannies in a Western Hebridean Isle, which sometimes shows you don't need to actually go far from home to find things out. You just need to look harder. But sometimes doing fieldwork makes you look harder, right? Yeah. So this is the phenomenon. So Seamus's big picture of Mary. Now there's two ways of doing possessors in Gaelic. One way is with this genitive construction. The other way is with the prepositional phrase. And I showed you that yesterday as well. Just to remind you, you could say Anjalav Mor Ek Seamus, the picture big at James. Right? So Anjalav Mor Ek Seamus Javadi. Okay, that's what you see in 85. The picture big at Seamus of Mary. Okay? You can also do it the other way around. So you can also have the PPs in the other direction. You can say Anjalav Mor Javadi Ek Seamus, the picture big of Mary at James. So you can commute those prepositional phrases. Okay? This is where the interesting thing comes in. Now, if you put, my voice is breaking. It's been a lot of talking I've been doing. If you put the possessor before the representational prepositional phrase, right? Then you can get the bound reading. So the picture at every boy of his mother is fine, just like in English. But the picture at his mother of every boy, you can't get the bound reading, right? So there's a dependency between the linear order and the apparent C command order, which looks nice. It sort of says, oh look, basically the at phrase, the possessor phrase, looks like it C commands the other one. And we're like, hurrah! Okay. So the weird thing is that when the order is reversed, both options are possible. So if you say the picture of his mother at every boy, so we've reversed the order now, then it turns out that the bound reading is possible. That is, the possessor still C commands the other PP, right? So you might think, okay, well, I don't quite know how that will work. We can work something out. The possessor somehow stays where it is, and the complement, something funky happens to it, and it'll be fine. But then it turns out the other way around is also good, right? So the picture of every boy at his mother is also absolutely fine. And that's what I find really bizarre. And it's really, there's no problem with that. So both ways around are good. Which sort of tells you that the possessor is C command. So when you have, so the generalization is actually the one that I've put in 95, which looks kind of contradictory. When the possessor PP precedes the complement PP, right, the possessor asymmetrically C commands the complement. Yeah? But when the complement precedes the possessor, then both C commands are possible. So we've got to figure out how to make that work. Right? And I'll show you that it's really close to impossible to make it work in this system. And it's trivial to make it work in this system. Just to highlight the fact that this pattern is not once off, it turns out that actually if we look at, it's not just bound pronouns into this, it's also reciprocals, and in fact anything that is sensitive to binding does this in Gaelic. So the reciprocal patterns you see in 91 to 94 just replicate this, right? So crucially, you can't bind from in possessor PP order, right? PP possessor, PP complement, PP representation order. You can't bind backwards effectively, but in the other order you can bind both ways. Okay, has everyone got that into their heads? All right, so the problem then for this, so this is a problem for Kane now, as I'll proceed to show you. I'll step through the trees here. Maybe we can do them on the board as well, but maybe it's not necessary. So have a look in the tree in 96. Okay, this looks lovely for Kane. Right? So far this looks lovely. This is the order. Actually, I'll just say at, which you must remember means possessor, of, which you must remember means the thing that's represented in the picture. So at, possessor, of the other one, right? So in 96, the way that you derive something like picture big at every girl of her mother, right, is you say, okay, well we're going to have not just one of these KPs, but two of them. Right? The lower one will be where the complement of the noun gets its case. So that's just exactly what we've got here. Right? That's what we've got here. Then the higher one will either be where a possessor is moved to get case, right? Some possessor phrase, and then you move, or maybe the possessor is just base generated in there, right? Doesn't really matter which way you want to do it. So we have some higher case phrase up here. See, this is the problem with these Canadian trees. They get too big, right? So they've got a lot of manure put in them to make them grow high. So anyway, possessor will be up here, okay, and that's what you see in the tree in 96. And then we'll put the preposition at in front of it, and then we'll take this thing and raise it right to the top. Okay, so that's what you see in 96, and that works lovely for when the possessor at phrase is first, right? Because of course in that tree there, the possessor will C command into the representation PP, so we get at C command into of, and not the other way around, which is exactly the data we saw. Hurrah! Okay, the problem then comes in getting the other way around, right? So the normal way of getting the other order in a Canadian system will be to pipe all of this lower PP. So we don't raise this, we raise this to here, but rather than raising it further, what we do is we pipe out all this lower PP and we put it in front of the at phrase, of the of phrase rather, of the at phrase. Yeah. So that's what you get in 97, right? So 97 is the tree that gives us of the for at, right? And we get that in a Canadian system by piping that whole PP, right, and raising it up to the front. Then we get picture big of every girl at her mother. Okay? Okay, now in this derivation of the of phrase first, it's quite clear that we can't C command from the of phrase into the at phrase. And reconstructing won't help us. So we still can't C command from the of phrase into the at phrase because the of phrase is below the at phrase. Everyone see that? Told you this was hard. Yeah? Does everyone see it? So basically, this cannot be the right derivation to get us this order with this binding effect. Because remember what happens is that you can say picture big of every girl at your mother. It's perfectly grammatical. You can get the binding. But in this tree, there's no C command between the quantifier and the pronoun. And even if we reconstruct that PP back into space position at LF, right, still doesn't get the right C command. So that can't be the analysis. So if we're going to be Keynesian, we can't have that analysis. All right, and that's the normal Keynesian analysis for dealing with these things, right? So we have to do something else. So another thing we could do is we could maybe raise the complement. So that is, we could base generate the things the other way around, right? So have a look at the tree in 98. Okay. So this would be a different way of trying to get the same effect through Kane, right? This isn't what Kane proposes, but it's trying to use Kane's system to try and get the effect. Okay. So what we do in this situation is we say, well, the possessor is introduced and case licensed below the position where the of phrase finally ends up, right? Now, theoretically, there's some problems with that almost immediately because it looks like you're going to have an intervention effect. But imagine we can somehow get around that. Well, actually keep it in your mind because it shows you this is not a very good analysis. But imagine you can somehow get around that. Then what you would do is you would first of all build the whole noun phrase with the complement inside it. You then merge in every girl. You case license every girl and put the preposition at in. Then you would take her mother from the complement position and raise it up into the higher case position, violating the defective intervention constraint, but never mind. Right? And then you put in the of phrase, and then you'd remnant raise the whole of the noun phrase. Do you want me to draw that on the board, or is it obvious? Shall I do a quick drawing on the board? So you do this. You go noun, DP, and then you do some adjectives, and you raise the noun. And then, rather than putting in the case licenser of this DP, like K normally does, what you do is you put in the possessor. And then what you would do is you put in the case licenser, that's a PP now, right? Then what you do is you put in the case licenser for this, you'd raise this into this position here, you'd put in the of, and then you'd remnant move this into the top bit. And that would give us NA of DP at DP. Right? You don't need to like this. I'm just telling you that it's a possible way of doing it. Okay. So the problem with doing that is that in this situation, in order to get every girl to C command into her mother, when her mother precedes every girl, is you have to reconstruct both the ZP and her mother. You have to basically put everything back into where you started from. Right? Then you could say that in this view, what you've got is you can get this is the funkiness I was telling you about earlier on. What you do is you can say you can get the of at order with both bindings, because what you can do is you can reconstruct, right, the of phrase back into space position. And then you can bind under reconstruction. Now, I already told you can't bind under reconstruction in Gallic, right? But maybe this is a special kind of reconstruction that you can bind under. So you can see I'm giving Kane a lot of rope here, right? You know, I mean, I'm trying to make this analysis work as hard as I possibly can, even though already we've had to say, you know, this is violating defective intervention by raising across this, and it's probably violating the general order of where possessors get put in, and it's requiring reconstruction. Okay, so I mean, it's not a very good analysis anyway, but you've got to try. You know, I'm doing my best for it, right? Still doesn't work. So if you, because then of course we've got to get the at of order, right? How do we get the at of order in this? Well, what we have to do is we have to take this PP here. We stop this off in its spec actually. We take that whole PP and then we move that PP up to the top. That will give us at of. Yeah? 10 minutes? Okay. I'll just at of. You'll probably need a break after this anyway. Okay. So that gives you the tree in 99. So now we have to ask, how do we, so that is picture big at every girl of her mother. That's the tree in 99. Yeah? Which is derived in this fashion here. Now, still we've not got POS, we've not got the possessive DPC commanding the complement of PP, right? We've not got that happening in the structure. So what we have to do is we have to reconstruct ZP into its base position, right? And we have to reconstruct everything back into its base position, basically. Right? But if we can reconstruct everything into its base position, right? Why can't we reconstruct that PP with a little I in it into its base position, and then C command from the of DP into the at DP? Right? Everyone with me?
Yeah.
So, because what that would allow us to do is have this order at of, but it would allow the binding from of into at. We know that that's wrong, because in the order of at, you can only have binding from at into of and not vice versa. So what you'd have to do to be Kane is go to a lot of opera and shrink. No. What you'd have to do to be Kane is you'd have to you'd have to say, well, we can reconstruct sometimes, right? That is, we can reconstruct the ZP complement of K in 99 in order to get binding from at to of, but we can't C command reconstruct the PP complement of the other K in 99, because otherwise we'd get the wrong prediction, we'd get binding from of into at with the at of order. Right? Everyone's like, what? Okay. So everyone sees how this is really a fairly, I mean, this is not going to work, right? I mean, you could make it work. You could say, you can reconstruct here and you can't reconstruct here. That's what you'd have to say, right? That's not an analysis. Well, it's an analysis, but it's certainly not an explanation of what's going on here. All it does is it says, I'm going to write some trees, I'm going to put some features on them, and I'm going to say you can reconstruct here and not reconstruct here. But how is the kid meant to know this? Right? That is, how does a child who's learning this language, how are they meant to know that you can reconstruct the ZP complement of K when K licenses a possessor, but not the ZP complement of K when K licenses a non-possessor? That's what you'd have to say. But there's absolutely no way of doing that, right? I mean, it's not an analysis. I mean, it's an analysis, but it's not an explanation. All right, now let's imagine we are me instead of K. Far less opera involved. The proposal in my story looks like 103. And then I'll show you this, then I'll have a break. So, just as in the Keynes situation where we had to have two KPs, in my situation we need to have two cof phrases. One will be in the specifier of the other. Okay? So we'll have this embedding structure. So what we'll have then is we'll have the representation one, rep. It'll generate its own little cof. And then in the specifier of this, we'll have a K. And that one is, so this is the representational cof, right? So that's cof rep, let's call it, for the representational one. And then we've got the noun phrase in here. That's pronounced as gen, or of. Okay. And then the rest of the noun phrases in this position here. I've called it def, but it doesn't really matter. That's the rest of the noun phrase where we get N and A. Okay. And actually, I think we get much more than that. I think we get, the D, and I think we get the number. But that's not really relevant to what we're talking about right now. And then this cof P is in the specifier of another cof P, and that one is going to be the one that's introducing the possessor. Okay? So whatever that, so this is like a version of, pos P or something. So we have another cof there, and this is cof pos. And it's got exactly the same structure as this. We've got KP, it's cof pos. Okay? And that's going to be pronounced as at, ek in Gaelic. And in its specifier is this. And then higher up we have some various other things. So actually one of the things we have, for example, is the demonstrative. or all, go there. Then we have D here, and then we'll raise this into the specifier of D. If I get time after, well, I probably will after in the next session, I'll take you through how that analysis of raising here gives us a really beautiful story for possessive constructions in general. So, but this is not that well. Let's just move this to here. We'll come back to that in a little bit. Okay, so this is going to give us the picture big those of Mary at Fred. Oops. Of Mary at Fred. Okay? Alright. Now, what I need to do to make this system work in terms of moving these two things around, what I'm going to suggest is that we have, let's get rid of this just now, higher. What we have is a position here, which I'll call script for scrambling. This can be like the Korean scrambling position. It has no obvious, it's a short scrambling position, has no obvious kind of effect on the actual meaning. It's not like you move into some quantificational position or something like that. It's just a word order kind of effect, right? I think that it's, well, okay. I'm not going to go into what it is. So the idea then with saying there's this little scrambling position here, which you can't actually have in Kane's story. If you try putting a little scrambling position in Kane's story, you end up taking way too much structure with you each time you move it. So you end up, like the Collins problem, you end up taking bits of the noun phrase that you don't want to take with you. I can go into that if you like, but it's not really crucial. So the idea then will be, and that's because, okay, so the idea then will be, this ordering will be noun, adjective, of, at, right? Now, how do we get the noun, adjective, at, of order? Well, that's easy. What we do is we scramble at phrase into here. Okay? So then what we get is noun, adjective, at phrase, of phrase. And this is hierarchically prominent with respect to this. So this can C command into that. Right? What about if, so that gives us at, of. And notice that in that circumstance, of is not hierarchically prominent, 2 minutes, yeah, with respect to at, so we don't get the C command in the other direction. Yeah? Okay, so that's how we get the basic first part of the binding linearization asymmetry. When at is first, it's higher. That's basically it. When at is first, it's higher, and therefore of sequence it. How do we get the of first? Well, obviously we don't move the at. Now, this is a situation where the of is first, and then we have the at. Right? But in this situation, the at is still hierarchically higher than the of. Right? So, I mean, I won't go through it in terms of defining how this works. As we talked about yesterday, I think it was your question at the back, we talked about, is it really, in my system, do we have C command? What kind of C command? We have sort of category command. But you can see that this category is above this category, right? Which means that this is hierarchically prominent with respect to this. Okay? So, so this is of at, but at will bind into of. But we also need of at with of binding into at. But look what happens if we do this. I remember discovering this and going, if we take this and we scramble it to here, string vacuously, right? It's not going to make any difference to the pronunciation. But then we get of at with of higher than at. Right? So we get noun adjective of at, so we can bind of into at. Or we get noun adjective at of, noun adjective of at, where at can bind into of. Or we get noun adjective at of, where at can bind into of. But there's no way of getting noun adjective at of with of binding into at. Binding linearization asymmetry, trivially captured. No reconstruction, everything happens at the surface, there's nothing more to say. How elegant was that? That, I think, is a very neat, I think what that shows is that this kind of system, right, has an analysis of this fairly complicated set of binding effects that this kind of system can only stipulate. Now there are two open, I know there's 1 minute, right? There are no minutes. Oh, there's a question. Oh, there's lots of questions. Okay, so there and then there.
I have a question about your scrambling.
Yeah.
method. What motivates the scrambling in Gaelic? And is Gaelic, does Gaelic is scrambling in general?
So I call it scrambling. That was maybe a bad word to use in this audience. I mean, so we have to have some way of reordering the prepositional phrases, right? And moreover, we can see from this data that that way of reordering the prepositional phrases involves a change in hierarchical structure, right? Because of the binding effects I've just shown you. So I don't know what that is, but it is something that reorders and creates an extra piece of hierarchy. It turns out that we find exactly the same effects in English, as I said. So if you look at, you know, I have to generate these from scratch on the top of my head. If you take something like, so a picture of Sue by Mary, or a picture of Mary by Sue, you can show that we find exactly the same binding linearization effect that we saw in Gaelic in English. We also find the same thing in Italian, so there's some data in Italian here, and I think it's actually pretty universal. So it goes, where you get a head initial language, and you're able to reorder the PPs, the reordering of the PPs creates new binding possibilities in one way and not the other way. So I've tried it in Hawaiian to get the same effect, I've tried it in Gaelic, I've tried it in French, I've tried it in English, I've tried it in Italian. So, you know, I need some more head initial languages to try it in, but it seems to be pretty universal. So I can't tell you what it is, and that's a very deep question. It's essentially what is responsible for PP extraposition, because that's what it is. This is PP extraposition reanalyzed as scrambling raising. Scrambling is maybe the wrong words, right? I mean, I just couldn't think of another thing to call it. Scrambling is also an operation which creates new hierarchical relationships without changing, you know, it's not criterial, right? It's not WH movement or topic movement or something, right? So that's why I called it that. I don't know what more to say about it than that. Yeah.
Yes, I think my question seems to be almost solved. But I wonder whether when we change at phrase and o phrase, we change the order, the meaning will be different?
The dominance. What will be different, sorry?
The meaning.
The meaning?
Yeah.
No. There is no change in when you change. It's like in English, if I say, you know, the picture by Sue of Mary, the picture of Mary by Sue.
I think they have different meaning, right?
In English?
In English, no?
The picture of Mary by Sue, the picture by Mary of Sue. In fact, I can barely remember what I just said. I mean, it feels to me that they're like the same, you know, the picture of Mary by Sue, the picture by Mary of Sue, they feel like repetitions almost. I mean, they're not, obviously. But like, I mean, I can't think of any difference. I mean, there might be a stress difference, but that's only because nuclear stress goes to the right of English. But I don't see that there's any meaning difference in that case.
So could you say the same thing even though qualifiers involved?
Well, you can say the same thing, but you get different binding effects with the quantifiers, as I just showed, right? So this is syntax, absolutely. It changes dominance relationships or prominence, syntactic prominence relationships in the tree. So absolutely, it changes the syntax. In terms of the thematic meaning or the information structural meaning, I can't see any distinction, and no one I've talked to can see any distinction in English or in French or in Italian or in Hawaiian to the extent that we know that.
But some qualifiers involved, there may be scope differences.
Yeah, so that's what you see. I mean, scope differences as well as the binding differences, you mean. The problem with English scope is that it's very flexible inside the VP anyway, right? But I don't know, so like, I haven't tried this in Gaelic, but let's try it in English. The picture of every girl by someone. The picture by someone of every girl. Every girl. slight preference for wide scope in this case, but I think that's just because we get prominence, we get intonational prominence on this. So if I focus picture, the picture of every girl by someone, and the picture by someone of every girl, where I take intonational prominence off of this, which is where it normally is by default in English, I'm pretty sure that you don't get any distinction. So I think, but that's what we expect, because quantifiers in English, we know that they can re-scope themselves inside lexical domains, right? We know that, everyone saw someone has these two different meanings. So English has LF understanding of scope. But it's a very good question, because normally with scrambling, you get scope freezing with quantifiers, right? Yeah, but it doesn't seem to be for this. So it's probably not scrambling, but thanks, that's actually a good point. I should write that down.
In Korean, in the case of scrambling, if you scramble involves quantifiers, there's a scope.
Yeah. I don't think there is in English. So let's not call it scrambling. Let's, in time-honored minimalist tradition, let's call it F for some functional head. Right? Yeah. Other questions?
Yeah. What forces you to have this underlying structure?
What forces you to have
this underlying structure? What if you switch the
this up to here? So remember, I'm assuming that we have a universal extended projection sequence, which every language has some subsection of in its night phrase. So I think inside that, basically, we have Kof, rep. Actually, all of those ones, which is lower in the sequence than Kof pos. And actually, I think that we've got Kof part lower than Kof rep, lower than Kof pos. I think that's the actual universal order. So the thing that forces it is the same thing that forces D to be above none. It's part of the functional sequence. Yeah. Anything else? Okay, so it seems to me that, the next section shows you what's going on with Italian, and then I do a few head final languages. And I think that I'll just finish off with that after the break, since we've stopped here. And then I'll show you how possessives work in this system. Okay? All right. So, break. Kevin?
Okay. Take a break.